He can't make me feel anything, Ava Bennett said, her voice steady but hollow, standing beneath a chandelier that glittered like frozen stars above a ballroom, filled with people who weren't there to celebrate love, but to witness a transaction. Her $200,000 silk gown wrapped around her like armor, not romance. And beside her stood Victor Kane, a man twice her age, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His presence heavy, controlled, and impossible to ignore. He didn't react at first, not when the whispers spread across the room, not when a few guests exchanged glances that bordered on disbelief, and not even when Ava lifted her chin slightly, as if daring the moment to break her. Victor simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted, just for a second, like a crack beneath ice no one else noticed. The air felt thick, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for him to respond, to assert control, to remind everyone who he was, but he didn't. Instead, he turned slightly toward the officiant and nodded once, a quiet signal to continue, as if her words had not just challenged his authority in front of an entire room of powerful people. Ava felt it then, not fear, not yet, but confusion, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Men like Victor Kane didn't stay silent when they were challenged, they didn't allow themselves to be diminished. And yet here he was, composed, distant, almost careful. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet, the soft petals pressing against her skin as if grounding her in a reality she still couldn't accept. 72 hours earlier, she had been standing in a completely different room, wearing jeans and a worn sweater, listening as her father's voice cracked under the weight of debts that had spiraled beyond control, and the name Victor Kane had entered her life not as a person, but as a solution, a final, irreversible decision. This marriage was never about love, never about choice. It was about survival, about protection, about stepping into a world she had only heard about in whispers and headlines. And now, standing here, she realized something far more unsettling than fear. Victor Kane wasn't looking at her like a possession, or a prize, or even a responsibility. He was looking at her like he was trying to understand her, and that made everything more dangerous than she had prepared for. Because if he had been cruel, if he had been cold in the way she expected, she could have hated him easily. She could have built walls that would never fall. But this quiet restraint, this refusal to dominate the moment, it unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. The officiant's voice continued somewhere in the background, distant and blurred, as Ava stood there between two versions of reality, the one she believed she was entering, and the one unfolding right in front of her. And as Victor finally reached for her hand, not gripping, not forcing, just offering, she hesitated for half a second longer than anyone noticed, except him. 72 hours earlier, Ava Bennett stood in a narrow kitchen that smelled faintly of burned coffee and old wood, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she could hold her life together by sheer force, while her father sat across from her with trembling hands, unable to meet her eyes. The silence between them heavier than any words he could not bring himself to say. The bills were spread across the table like quiet accusations, numbers that had grown too large, too fast, until they swallowed everything. And when he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller than she had ever heard it, explaining that there was only one offer left, one man willing to make it all disappear. Ava did not cry, not when she heard the name Victor Kane, not when she understood what the offer required, and not even when her father's voice broke under the weight of it, because something inside her had already begun to shut down, like a door closing slowly but permanently. She asked only one question, her tone calm in a way that did not belong to a 20-year-old girl, asking what would happen if she said no. And the answer came in a silence that told her everything she needed to know. The world her father had tried to protect her from had already reached their doorstep, and this was not a choice. It was an exchange. Later that night, she sat alone on the edge of her bed, staring at the faint glow of a streetlight through the window, replaying the conversation over and over until the words lost their meaning and became something colder, something simpler: survival. She made her decision without tears, without hesitation, because allowing herself to feel anything would have made it impossible. The next morning, a black car arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, polished to a mirror shine that reflected a version of her she barely recognized, and the driver opened the door without a word, as if everything had already been arranged long before she agreed. The ride was quiet. The city passing by in a blur of familiar streets that suddenly felt distant, like she was already leaving a life behind. When they arrived at Victor Kane's estate, Ava stepped out slowly, her shoes touching the smooth stone driveway that stretched wider than her entire street back home, and she lifted her eyes to take in the building, its tall windows and clean lines cold and precise, more like a fortress than a home. Inside, everything was immaculate, controlled, every surface reflecting soft golden light, and every person she passed moved with quiet efficiency, never lingering, never questioning, as if they all understood their place in a system she had just entered. She expected to feel small there, to feel overwhelmed or afraid, but instead she felt something else entirely, something quieter and more dangerous, a growing numbness that settled deep in her chest. When Victor finally appeared at the far end of the hall, walking toward her with measured steps, Ava straightened slightly, preparing herself for the man she had imagined, someone harsh, someone imposing, someone who would make it easy to hate him. But as he stopped a few feet away and met her gaze, there was no immediate demand, no raised voice, no sign of the force she had braced herself against, only a calm presence that studied her as if she were more than a transaction. And that was the moment Ava realized the rules she had prepared for might not apply at all. And that uncertainty felt far more unsettling than anything she had feared. Victor Kane stopped exactly 3 feet away from Ava, close enough for her to see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, not from age alone, but from something heavier, something that had settled into him over time. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet stretching between them like a test neither had agreed to take. Ava kept her shoulders squared, her chin level, refusing to look away first, because she had already decided that if she could not escape this arrangement, she would not enter it as someone broken. Victor noticed, of course he did, the way her hands were steady when they should have been shaking, the way her breathing stayed even when everything around her was unfamiliar, and something in his expression softened just slightly, not enough for anyone else to see, but enough to change the air between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, carrying no edge of threat, only quiet certainty as he said her name for the first time, Ava Bennett, as if confirming she was real and not just a condition in a contract. He did not step closer, did not reach for her, did not claim the space the way a man in his position easily could have, and that restraint unsettled her more than any show of dominance would have. He gestured lightly toward the hallway behind him, inviting rather than ordering, and she followed, her footsteps echoing softly against polished marble floors that reflected their silhouettes in long, stretched lines, like two people walking into something neither fully understood. The staff moved around them with practiced discretion, their eyes lowered, their movements precise, and Ava felt the weight of a system that operated without chaos, without question, a world built on rules she had not yet learned. Victor led her into a large study where the light filtered in through tall windows, warm but distant, and on a wide desk lay a single folder, untouched, waiting. He stopped beside it, but did not open it, instead turning to face her again, giving her space, giving her time, and for the first time since stepping into his world, Ava felt something shift inside her, not fear, but uncertainty that refused to settle into anything clear. He told her, calmly, that everything inside that folder outlined the agreement, the protections, the expectations, but his voice slowed slightly on that last word, as if he were choosing it carefully. And then he added something she had not expected, something that did not fit the image she had built of him. He said that nothing would happen without her understanding it first. Ava's eyes flickered toward the folder, but she did not move immediately, because this was not how it was supposed to go. She had prepared herself for pressure, for urgency, for a demand that would leave no room to think, and instead she was being given space, and that space felt more dangerous than any force. Slowly, she stepped forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder, the paper cool beneath her touch, and as she opened it, scanning the clean, precise lines of text, she realized something that made her heartbeat shift for the first time. This was not written like a trap, it was written like a shield, structured, deliberate, and protective in ways she had not imagined. She looked up at him then, really looked, searching for the catch, for the hidden cost that had to be there, because nothing like this came without one. But Victor Kane simply met her gaze, steady and unreadable, as if waiting not for her agreement, but for her decision. And in that moment, Ava understood that whatever this arrangement was, it was not as simple as being forced into a life. It was stepping into something far more complicated, something that did not fit into the fear she had been holding on to. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else. So far, the first night inside Victor Kane's estate did not feel like the beginning of a marriage. It felt like entering a world that moved without asking for permission, where every detail had already been decided long before Ava Bennett stepped through the door. And yet, strangely, none of those decisions seemed to press against her the way she expected. She was shown to a room larger than her entire apartment back home. The ceilings high, the walls lined with soft neutral tones, the bed perfectly made as if no one had ever slept in it. And the silence inside that space felt almost too clean, too untouched, like it was waiting for her to define what it would become. The woman who guided her there spoke gently, explaining where everything was, what time meals were served, who she could call if she needed anything, and every sentence was careful, respectful, never once implying ownership or obligation, which only made Ava more guarded, because kindness in a place like this had to mean something, and she did not yet know what. When the door closed, and she was finally alone, Ava stood in the center of the room without moving, her eyes tracing the edges of a life she did not recognize, her fingers slowly brushing against the fabric of the curtains, the smooth surface of the dresser, grounding herself in something real, something she could touch. She waited for something to happen, for a knock on the door, for a demand, for a reminder of why she was there. But the minutes passed quietly, stretching into an hour, then two, and the silence remained unbroken. It unsettled her more with each passing second, because this was not how control usually looked. It was not loud. It was not forceful. It was patient, and patience meant intention. Later that evening, she made her way downstairs, following the faint glow of warm light into a dining room where a table had been set for two, the place settings precise, the atmosphere calm, almost ordinary if not for the weight of everything surrounding it. Victor was already there, seated at the far end, not at the head of the table as she expected, but slightly to the side, as if leaving space for her rather than claiming it. And when she entered, he stood, not as a performance, not exaggerated, just a simple acknowledgement of her presence. Ava paused for a fraction of a second, taking in the scene, the quiet order of it, the absence of pressure, and then she walked forward, choosing her seat carefully, positioning herself where she could see both him and the exit. An instinct she did not need to explain. The meal was served without interruption, the staff moving in and out like shadows. And Victor did not speak immediately, allowing the silence to exist without forcing it to be filled, which only made Ava more aware of every small detail, the sound of silverware, the soft hum of the lights, the steady rhythm of her own breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost measured, asking if the room was acceptable, not assuming, not deciding for her, and Ava answered simply, yes, her tone neutral, giving nothing away. The conversation did not grow from there. It did not need to, because something else was happening beneath the surface, something quieter and more complicated, a negotiation not of words but of boundaries. Ava realized then that Victor was not trying to control her through force. He was doing something far more precise. He was giving her just enough space to reveal how she would respond. And that realization shifted something inside her, because for the first time, she understood that this was not a situation she could navigate with resistance alone. It was something that required awareness, patience, and a kind of strength she had not yet needed before. And as she sat across from him in that quiet room, Ava Bennett made a decision that no one else could see. If she was going to survive this world, she would not just endure it. She would learn it, piece by piece, until she understood exactly what kind of man Victor Kane truly was. By the second day, Ava Bennett began to notice the patterns, the small details that did not announce themselves, but quietly reshaped everything she thought she understood, because nothing in Victor Kane's world happened by accident. The staff never spoke over her, never dismissed her presence, and more importantly, never treated her like someone who had been brought in without a choice, which told her one thing clearly. Instructions had been given, precise and deliberate. She tested it in subtle ways, asking for simple things at unexpected times, changing her routine without notice, watching for hesitation, for correction, for the invisible boundaries she expected to run into, but none came. Only quiet accommodation, as if her comfort had already been accounted for long before she arrived. That alone did not ease her. It sharpened her awareness, because control that appeared as freedom was still control, just refined. Later that afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the polished floors in long golden lines, Ava found herself wandering into a quieter wing of the house, where the atmosphere shifted slightly, less formal, more personal, and there, tucked between two tall shelves, she noticed a single photograph placed not for display, but for memory. It was not extravagant, not framed in anything expensive, just a simple image of a woman standing beside a younger Victor, her expression soft, his posture less guarded, less distant, and for a moment Ava stood still, studying a version of him that did not match the man she had met. She did not hear him approach, not until his voice, low and even, broke the silence behind her, asking if she was lost. Ava turned, her hand still resting lightly against the edge of the shelf, and for a brief second, something passed between them, not confrontation, not apology, but recognition that she had stepped into a space not meant for others. She expected tension, expected him to close that door quickly, to reclaim whatever part of himself that photograph represented, but he did not move to hide it, did not explain it either, simply stood there, allowing the moment to exist without defense. Ava tilted her head slightly, her eyes flicking once more to the image before returning to him. And she asked, quietly but directly, who she was. Victor's gaze did not waver, but there was a pause, a fraction longer than his usual precision, before he answered that she was someone who had believed in a version of him he could not keep, and that was all he said. No elaboration, no attempt to shape how Ava should interpret it, just a statement that settled into the air between them. Ava felt something shift again, a subtle fracture in the image she had built, because men like him were not supposed to carry something like that openly. They were supposed to bury it, to replace it, to erase it, and yet here it was, untouched, unhidden. She stepped back slightly, giving the space back to him, but her mind did not let go of what she had just seen, because it introduced a possibility she had not allowed herself to consider. That Victor Kane was not simply a man who controlled everything around him, but someone who had once lost something he could not replace, and that loss still existed quietly beneath everything he was now. As she walked away, her steps slower than before, Ava realized that the rules of this arrangement were still unfolding, and for the first time since entering his world, her resistance did not feel as solid as it had the day before, because understanding someone, even a little, made it harder to keep them at a distance. And that was a risk she had not prepared for. The realization did not come all at once. It arrived in quiet fragments that Ava Bennett could not ignore, each one small on its own, but impossible to dismiss when they began to form a pattern, because the man she had prepared herself to endure was not behaving like someone who needed to prove his power. That evening, as the house settled into its usual calm, Ava found a neatly folded envelope placed on the table in her room, her name written across it in clean, precise lettering, and for a moment she simply stood there, staring at it as if it might disappear if she waited long enough. Slowly, she stepped forward and picked it up, the paper thick and smooth beneath her fingers, and when she opened it, she found documents inside, not contracts, not obligations, but confirmations, her father's debts cleared, every account balanced, every threat removed in a way that left no trace behind. Her breath caught, just slightly, as she read through the pages again, searching for conditions, for hidden clauses, for something that would anchor this act to the agreement she had signed. But there was nothing, no leverage, no reminder that this was something she owed. The door behind her remained closed, no one waiting to explain it, no one watching for her reaction. And that absence spoke louder than any explanation could have. Ava set the papers down carefully, her mind moving faster now, trying to understand the intention behind something that felt too complete to be accidental. Later, when she went downstairs, she found Victor in the same study, standing near the window with the city lights stretching out beyond him like a distant constellation, his posture still, his presence as controlled as ever, and for a moment she hesitated at the threshold, the envelope still in her hand, unsure of how to step into a conversation she had not prepared for. He noticed her immediately. Of course he did, turning slightly as if he had been expecting her, but he did not ask why she was there, did not draw attention to the paper she held, leaving the space open for her to decide how to begin. Ava walked in slowly, placing the envelope on the desk between them, her eyes lifting to meet his, searching for something she could hold on to, some explanation that would restore the balance she understood. And when she spoke, her voice was quieter than she intended, asking why. Victor looked at the envelope briefly, then back at her, and there was no hesitation in his answer, no performance, just a simple truth delivered without weight, because it needed to be done. Ava frowned slightly, the simplicity of it unsettling her more than anything else, because nothing in her world had ever been done without expectation, without return, and yet here he was, offering no justification beyond necessity. She pressed further, asking what he expected in return, and for the first time, Victor's expression shifted just enough to reveal something beneath the control, not irritation, not amusement, but something closer to disappointment. As if the question itself confirmed a distance he had already recognized, he answered calmly, saying that not everything required a transaction, and the words settled into the room with a quiet finality that Ava could not easily challenge. She looked at him then, really looked, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the image she had built, and for the first time since this arrangement began, she felt something unfamiliar rise beneath her carefully maintained composure, not fear, not resistance, but the beginning of doubt, not about him, but about herself, about the certainty she had clung to so tightly. And as she stood there in that quiet room, Ava realized that the line she had drawn between them was no longer as clear as it had been, and that uncertainty, that slow shift in perception, was far more dangerous than anything she had faced before. It happened so quietly that Ava Bennett almost missed it, the moment when uncertainty turned into something she could feel in her chest, something heavier than confusion but softer than fear. And it began not with a word, but with a change in the air around her. The following evening, the estate felt different, not in structure, not in routine, but in something unspoken, a subtle tightening that moved through the staff like a ripple no one acknowledged, and Ava noticed it immediately, because she had learned by now that silence in this place always meant something. She stood near one of the tall windows, watching the last light of the day stretch across the city, when she sensed it, a presence behind her, not abrupt, not alarming, but steady, familiar in a way that should not have been possible so soon. Victor stopped a few feet away, as he always did, never closing the distance unless invited, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet between them no longer sharp, but weighted with everything that had been building over the past days. Ava turned slowly, her eyes meeting his, and there was something different in the way she held his gaze now, less defiance, less resistance, replaced by something she had not intended to allow, awareness. Victor studied her with that same measured calm, but there was a subtle shift in him as well, something more attentive, as if he had begun to notice the changes she herself was only starting to understand. Before either of them could speak, a voice echoed faintly from down the hall, controlled but urgent, and though the words were not clear, the tone was enough to change the atmosphere entirely. Ava felt it immediately, the shift in Victor's posture, the way his shoulders straightened, the way his attention sharpened, not toward her, but outward, towards something unseen. He did not move right away, and that pause, that fraction of hesitation, told Ava more than any explanation could have, because for the first time, she understood that whatever world he stood at the center of, it did not stop at the walls of this house. Victor turned back to her, his expression composed but distant, as if part of him had already stepped into another space. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a quiet urgency beneath it as he told her to remain inside, to stay where it was safe. Ava's instinct was immediate, a quiet resistance rising in her chest, not from fear, but from something else, something she did not yet have a name for, because the idea of being separated from that moment, from him, felt wrong in a way she could not explain. She did not argue, not out loud, But her eyes followed him as he moved toward the door, his steps precise, controlled, every movement intentional. And just before he crossed the threshold, he stopped, turning back once more, his gaze meeting hers with a weight that held something unspoken, something protective, something that lingered longer than necessary. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Ava alone in a silence that felt entirely different from the one she had known before. She stood there for a long moment without moving, her heart steady but no longer distant, her thoughts shifting in ways she had not prepared for, because for the first time since entering his world, she did not feel like an outsider observing something she wanted to escape. She felt connected to it, to him, in a way that unsettled her more than anything else had so far. And as the quiet stretched around her, Ava realized that the line she had drawn between herself and Victor Kane was no longer holding. And whatever was happening beyond that door was not just his world anymore. It was beginning to pull her in as well. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like something heavy settling into place. And Ava Bennett felt it before she understood it, a tension that wrapped around the air and held it there, steady and unrelenting. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had begun to lose its shape inside those walls, and she found herself moving without deciding to, her steps quiet against the polished floor as she followed the direction Victor had gone, not out of defiance, but because something inside her refused to remain still. The hallway felt different now, no longer just a passage of soft light and controlled movement, but something narrower, more focused, as if every step carried weight she had not noticed before. She stopped before reaching the end, just out of sight, where voices could be heard in low, measured tones, nothing raised, nothing chaotic, but there was a precision in them that told her everything she needed to know. This was not ordinary. This was the part of his world that did not belong to her. She should have turned back then, she knew that, but instead she stayed, her hand resting lightly against the wall as if grounding herself, listening not to the words, but to the space between them, to the pauses, to the shifts in tone, to the way Victor's voice carried something she had not heard before, something sharper, more distant, more aligned with the man everyone else believed him to be. And then it stopped, not gradually, but all at once, the quiet returning like a door closing, and for a moment everything held still. Ava stepped back instinctively, her breath catching just slightly as the door opened. And Victor stepped out, his expression composed. But there was a difference, something in his eyes that had not yet settled, something that lingered just beneath the surface. He saw her immediately. Of course he did. And for a brief second, neither of them moved, the distance between them filled with everything that had just happened and everything that had not been said. Ava expected him to question her, to remind her of the boundaries she had crossed. But he did not. Instead he walked toward her, his steps slower now, more deliberate, as if recalibrating something within himself. When he stopped in front of her, closer than he had ever stood before, Ava felt it. The shift, the quiet gravity of his presence. Not overwhelming, not controlling, but undeniable. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching, not for answers, but for understanding. And when he spoke, his voice was lower than before, steady but carrying something she had not heard until now. Concern. He asked if she was all right, not as a formality, not as an expectation, but as if the answer mattered. Ava blinked, caught off guard by the question, by the way it reached her without force. And for the first time, she did not have an immediate response ready, because the truth was no longer simple. She nodded slowly, but her eyes did not leave his, and in that moment, something fragile surfaced, something she had kept tightly contained since the beginning, and it showed, just for a second, in the way her expression softened, in the way her shoulders lowered ever so slightly. Victor noticed, and that was when it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet shift that changed everything. He reached out, not to take control, not to claim, but to steady, his hand stopping just short of her arm, giving her the choice, and Ava did not pull away. The space between them closed by less than an inch, but it was enough to break the distance she had built so carefully, enough to make her realize that whatever this was, it was no longer just survival. And as they stood there in that quiet hallway, neither speaking, neither moving, Ava Bennett felt something she had sworn she would not allow something that rose without permission and refused to be pushed back down, and for the first time, she understood that the danger was no longer the world Victor Kane belonged to. It was the way she was beginning to see him. The next morning arrived with a stillness that felt different from the days before, not empty, not uncertain, but heavy with something that had already begun to change, and Ava Bennett felt it the moment she opened her eyes, the quiet no longer pressing against her, but settling around her like something she was slowly becoming a part of. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her thoughts moving through everything that had happened, not in fragments anymore, but in a single, continuous line that led her to a place she had not expected to reach. When she stepped into the hallway, the house felt the same and yet entirely different. The same measured movements, the same soft light reflecting off polished surfaces, but now she noticed the way people acknowledged her presence with quiet respect, not because they were told to, but because something about her place here had shifted, something that could not be written into an agreement. She moved toward the dining room without hesitation, no longer tracing the edges of the space like a guest, but walking through it with a growing sense of awareness. And when she entered, Victor was already there, standing by the window, his posture calm, his attention fixed on the city beyond, as if he had been there for some time. He turned when he heard her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them no longer sharp or uncertain, but steady, almost familiar. Ava took a few steps forward, stopping closer than she had before, not out of defiance, not out of necessity, but because the distance no longer felt required, and Victor noticed, his gaze holding hers with that same quiet intensity. But now there was something else beneath it, something softer, something that did not retreat when met directly. She did not look away this time, did not build the walls she had relied on so easily before, because somewhere between the moment she stepped into his world and the moment she stood here now, something inside her had shifted in a way she could no longer deny. She spoke first, her voice calm but carrying a weight that had not been there before, telling him that she understood now, not everything, not the full extent of the world he carried, but enough to see that this was never as simple as she had believed. Victor listened without interruption, his expression unreadable but attentive, as if every word mattered more than he would ever say out loud. Ava hesitated for just a second, not because she was unsure, but because she understood the importance of what came next, and then she said it, not as a surrender, not as an obligation, but as a choice. She told him that she was not here because she had to be anymore. She was here because she was choosing to stay. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality, and for the first time since the beginning, Victor's composure shifted. In a way that could not be hidden, not dramatically, not openly, but enough for her to see the way his breath changed, the way his eyes held something deeper than control. He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, closing the space between them not by force, but by intention, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it, asking if she was certain. Ava met his gaze without hesitation, her answer already written in the way she stood, steady, present, no longer guarded in the same way, and she nodded. For a moment, nothing else happened, no grand gesture, no declaration, just the quiet understanding that passed between them, something built not on what had been forced, but on what had been revealed. And as the morning light stretched across the room, casting long shadows that slowly softened into warmth, Ava Bennett realized that what had begun as survival had turned into something far more complicated, something that could not be undone or ignored. And as she stood there with Victor Kane, she understood that this was not the end of the story. It was only the moment where everything truly began.